I read The Power by Naomi Alderman in 2021. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I wrote this about it after reading it. I found The Power to be extremely profound. It's one of those concepts that you feel you've read or explored before because of its perfectly evident weight and depth. But nothing I've ever read has attacked my assumptions about gender and power dynamics in this way before. The lessons here are layered creatively, and while the story becomes an amplified explosion of absolute corruption, I think it has roots in the reality of recorded history, even while allowing the reader to question what we think we know about what we've been allowed to learn in that regard. I also really like Alderman's inferences of spiritual origin. So much in the book lends itself to questioning all belief systems, and I love the subtle way the reader is led to inevitability, pattern, and ultimately acceptance. The characters all have unique and important voices, but the most interesting development for me was examining and evaluating the disconnected voice inside. My only quibble with the book was a somewhat binary exploration of dominance and submission. Repeatedly, submission seemed to be explained through characters' actions in the literal aspect of giving in or being marked for their weakness. I'd be interested to see a more nuanced look at the power dynamics in play, but for the purposes of this story, everything written here connected perfectly to the intense shifts for Alderman's creative landscape. Do we have to burn it all down, or should we find a way to work together? What is the voice inside you saying? I really like The Power. I ultimately don't think it's about gender. I think it's a lot about power. Creative conceit in shifting a superhuman power to the female gender and excluding men sets up a very interesting exploration of the way that power has affected the world. I did watch the series a little bit. I didn't really get into it. For some reason, it didn't have the same creative depth that the book did, and it might just be because I read it first. I would really like to hear from people who liked the series because I really couldn't get past the first couple episodes. I was looking for more connection to the characters, and Alderman does an amazing job of getting you deep inside the minds of the characters and their motivations. I really didn't get that from the series, and so it felt kind of slow to me. I definitely recommend the book, and am interested to hear about people's ideas about the series altogether. When I talk about this thing about the binary exploration of dominance and submission, it got me kind of frustrated that submission, or doing what you're told, was always explained in weakness. It was always giving in. It was always relenting. Submission isn't always weakness. What's coming up for me now when I'm talking about this is thinking about Game of Thrones and the way that Game of Thrones actually explored characters that may have presented as weak, but were not submitting. One of the characters that I'm thinking about this is, for some reason, I'm thinking about Varys and the way that he executed power, even though he was constantly submissive to the dominant leaders that he was working for or that he was advising. Submission for him was a strategic act of power. And in this book, in The Power, I felt like submission was always portrayed as weakness. And I think there's more nuances there. And I think really the point of this book was to examine the way that power works and power moves through society and influences the choices that people make. I think it does a great job of exploring that. That sort of binary was one way that I didn't think it went far enough. What is the voice inside you saying? That is sort of a toss-away to the book about that sort of thing that I mentioned earlier in the review too, about the most interesting development was examining the disconnected voice inside. The voice inside is a character in Alderman's book here, and it's very interesting. So listening to yourself and listening to your instincts, I think, is very valuable in the face of all of the extreme situations that happen as a result of this power coming to humans. Do we have to burn it all down, or should we find a way to work together? This is that thing about absolute power. How do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This book is a very interesting take on how that happens. The question is valid. We could find a way to work together. We probably should find a way to work together. But it does feel like death and regeneration, destruction and rebirth, all these things are important. This book is a very interesting, supernatural look at the way that power affects people and what might happen if the power in the genders really did shift in a very extreme and otherworldly way. The book is The Power by Naomi Alderman. I read it in 2021. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads.